hundreds of years erased in history's biggest cover-up. You live your life trusting what you've been taught. Ancient civilizations rise and fall. Empires crumble under their own weight. Progress marches forward through the ages. But what if I told you that nearly 1,000 years of human history might be a fabrication? That entire centuries could have been inserted into our timeline by those who sought to control not just territory, but time itself? Tonight, we're going to explore something that will shake the very foundation of everything you believe about the past. Because hidden beneath the surface of accepted history lies evidence of manipulation so vast, so systematic, that it makes every conspiracy theory you've ever heard seem quaint by comparison. This isn't about isolated incidents or cover-ups that lasted decades. This is about the systematic erasure and reconstruction of centuries, the deliberate creation of what we call the Dark Ages, and the institution that orchestrated it all while positioning itself as humanity's saviour. You see, there's something deeply unsettling about the period historians call the Dark Ages. From roughly 500 to 1000 AD, Europe supposedly fell into a deep slumber. No great inventions, no architectural marvels, no scientific breakthroughs, just chaos, ignorance, and superstition. But here's what they don't want you to notice. While Europe was allegedly stumbling through darkness, the rest of the world was flourishing. China was inventing gunpowder and the printing press. The Islamic world was preserving Greek philosophy and advancing mathematics. India was making astronomical discoveries. Yet somehow, Europe, the continent that had given birth to Aristotle and engineered the Roman Empire, forgot how to think for nearly a millennium. But what if this darkness was manufactured? What if someone deliberately painted these centuries black to hide something far more significant? Let's start with a simple question that no historian wants to answer directly. Who exactly decided to call this period the Dark Ages? The answer might surprise you. It wasn't contemporary observers living through this time. It wasn't scholars examining evidence centuries later. It was the Catholic Church itself, working hand in hand with later historians who had every reason to make the pre-Renaissance world appear backward and ignorant. Think about it logically. If you wanted to position yourself as the bringer of light, wouldn't you first need to create darkness? If you wanted to be seen as the preserver of knowledge, wouldn't you first need to hide that knowledge away? And that's exactly what happened. When Rome fell in 476 AD, something extraordinary occurred. Not the collapse of civilization, but the rise of a new kind of power. The Catholic Church didn't just inherit the spiritual authority of the fallen empire. They inherited its libraries, its scholars, its entire intellectual infrastructure. And then they made a choice that would echo through history. They decided who could read. They decided what could be copied. They decided which books would survive and which would disappear into their secret archives, never to be seen again. Entire libraries vanished overnight. Manuscripts written in Greek, Latin, and other languages were either destroyed or locked away behind monastery walls. Only texts that served church doctrine were allowed to circulate, and only in ecclesiastical Latin that could be read by specially trained monks. For centuries, what Europeans knew of their own past was only what the Vatican allowed them to know. Independent verification disappeared. Secular scholarship was branded heresy. And slowly, methodically, the Church created the greatest information monopoly in human history. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Modern research is revealing that this erasure wasn't just about controlling knowledge, it was about controlling time itself. There's a theory gaining ground among independent historians called the phantom time hypothesis. It suggests that roughly 300 years of the early medieval period, from about 614 to 911 AD, never actually happened. that these years were artificially inserted into our timeline. At first, this sounds impossible, but when you examine the evidence, cracks begin to appear. There are virtually no reliable historical records from this period. The few documents that do exist were written centuries later by church scribes. Archaeological evidence is suspiciously sparse, and most damning of all, astronomical records don't align. When modern scientists calculate the positions of stars and eclipses mentioned in medieval texts, they find discrepancies of hundreds of years. Who had both the power and the motive to manipulate time itself? The same institution that controlled every library, every school, every manuscript in Europe, the Vatican. By inserting phantom centuries into history, the Church accomplished something remarkable. They created the illusion of ancient authority. They positioned themselves as the eternal guardians of civilization, and they manufactured a safe distance between the fall of Rome and the modern era, ensuring that no one could trace an unbroken line of secular knowledge that bypassed their control. Consider the implications. If nearly 300 years of history were fabricated, then we're not living in 2024. We might be living in 1724. Our entire conception of historical progress, of human development, of the rise and fall of civilizations, could be built on a foundation of lies. But the manipulation goes even deeper. The Church didn't just control what people could learn about the past, they controlled what people could discover about the present. During the so-called Dark Ages, anyone who dared to question official doctrine, anyone who showed too much curiosity about natural philosophy or ancient texts, risked being branded a heretic. And the punishment for heresy wasn't just social exile. It was death. Giordano Bruno was burned alive in 1600 for suggesting that the universe might be infinite. Galileo was forced to recant his observations about the solar system. Countless other scholars, whose names we'll never know, were silenced before they could share their discoveries. The Church created a climate of fear so pervasive that even thinking dangerous thoughts became a form of suicide. This wasn't just religious persecution. This was the systematic elimination of intellectual independence. For over 1,000 years, the only institution in Europe with the resources to copy manuscripts, maintain libraries, and educate scholars was the Church. They held a complete monopoly on knowledge, and they used that monopoly not to enlighten humanity, but to control it. The evidence is still there, hidden in plain sight. The Vatican's secret archives contain over 85 kilometers of shelving, holding more than 1 million documents spanning from the 8th century to the present. Yet less than 1% of this collection has ever been made public. Scholars who are granted access face severe restrictions: no photography, no photocopying, and access only to pre-approved materials that won't challenge established narratives. What are they hiding? Ancient maps that show geographical knowledge that supposedly didn't exist during the Dark Ages, scientific texts that predate the Renaissance by centuries, historical records that contradict the official timeline, documents that reveal the true scope of knowledge that was deliberately suppressed. But perhaps most disturbing of all are the gaps in the historical record itself. Between roughly 500 and 800 AD, Europe's documented history becomes so thin, it's as if the entire continent disappeared from the map. Meanwhile, detailed records from China, the Islamic world, and other civilizations continue uninterrupted. Why was it only Europe that entered this mysterious void? The answer becomes clear when you understand that this wasn't a natural decline. It was an engineered darkness. The Church systematically collected every manuscript they could find, officially to preserve them, but in practice, to control them. Monastic orders spread across Europe like an intelligence network, gathering ancient texts under the guise of religious preservation. What they collected was never returned. What contradicted church doctrine was never copied, and what challenged their authority simply vanished. By the time the Renaissance began, the Church had positioned itself perfectly. They could selectively release ancient knowledge, claiming it had been rediscovered, rather than admitting they had been hoarding it for centuries. The great Renaissance masters didn't just happen to stumble upon ancient Greek and Roman texts. They were given access to materials that had been locked away in church archives all along. This explains one of history's greatest puzzles. How did Renaissance thinkers achieve such sudden, dramatic breakthroughs? How did they leap from medieval ignorance to classical sophistication seemingly overnight? The answer is simple. The knowledge had never been lost, it had been hidden. And when the Church's political position required a cultural renaissance to maintain relevance, they opened their vaults just wide enough to create the illusion of rediscovery. Even today, this pattern continues. The Church maintains its role as the guardian of ancient wisdom, while carefully controlling what emerges from their archives. Scholars who ask inconvenient questions find their funding cut. Researchers who challenge the established timeline are marginalized. And the general public remains convinced that the Dark Ages were a natural period of human backwardness, rather than a manufactured void designed to hide the greatest knowledge heist in history. The implications extend far beyond academic history. If nearly a millennium of human development was artificially erased, then our understanding of human progress, of technological development, of the rise of civilization itself, is fundamentally flawed. We've been conditioned to accept that knowledge advances linearly, that human society naturally progresses from ignorance to enlightenment. But what if that's not true? What if knowledge has been deliberately suppressed, controlled, and released according to the agenda of those in power? This isn't just about the past. It's about understanding how information control works in any era. The same techniques used to create the Dark Ages are being employed today. Control the sources, limit access to original documents, create a consensus among approved authorities, marginalize dissenting voices, and gradually, the official narrative becomes the only narrative anyone remembers. But unlike previous generations, we have tools the medieval world never possessed. Satellite imagery that can detect archaeological anomalies, computer models that can verify astronomical claims, digital archives that can preserve evidence beyond the reach of institutional control. For the first time in over 1,000 years, we have the ability to peer behind the curtain and see the mechanisms of historical manipulation. The question is, do we have the courage to look? Because once you see the evidence, once you understand the scope of what was hidden, you can never go back to accepting the official story. You realize that history isn't just what happened. It's what someone decided to tell you happened, and those someones have been editing the story for far longer than anyone wants to admit. The Dark Ages weren't dark because humanity forgot how to think. They were dark because someone turned off the lights, and they've been controlling the dimmer switch ever since. The blood drips from an ancient needle as the Vatican's ink flows across parchment. Not metaphorically, literally. Because what you're about to discover isn't just another conspiracy theory dressed in speculation. It's the methodical erasure of human potential, documented in their own hand, sealed in their own vaults, and executed with the precision of a surgeon removing memories from the collective mind of civilization. We've explored how nearly 1,000 years vanished from history, how the Church positioned itself as humanity's sole guardian, while systematically burying the very knowledge that could have accelerated human progress by centuries. But the phantom time hypothesis and the manufactured Dark Ages were just the surface, the appetizer before the main course of deception, because in those secret archives, behind those triple-locked doors, lie documents that don't just rewrite medieval history. They expose a pattern, a methodology, a blueprint for how to control not just what people think, but what they're capable of thinking. And this blueprint didn't end with the Renaissance. It evolved, it adapted, and it's still being executed today. Consider this: every major leap in human consciousness, every breakthrough that threatened established power structures, every discovery that could have liberated minds from institutional control was either suppressed, co-opted, or delayed until it could be safely integrated into the existing framework. The printing press emerged when the church was ready to control what got printed. Scientific revolution when they could guide which truths were acceptable. Literacy spread when they controlled what texts were available to read. But here's where the pattern becomes truly sinister, because scattered throughout those Vatican archives are references to something they called the Great Delay. Not a single event, but a systematic policy, a recognition that human potential was advancing too quickly for institutional control to keep pace. So they didn't just hide knowledge, they actively retarded the development of human consciousness itself. Think about it. Why did the Renaissance feel like such an explosion of human capability? Because it wasn't humanity suddenly becoming smarter. It was the controlled release of capabilities that had been artificially suppressed for centuries, like releasing pressure from a valve just enough to prevent an explosion that would destroy the container entirely. The alchemists weren't just early chemists. They were the remnants of a scientific tradition that understood consciousness itself as malleable, as something that could be expanded or contracted through specific practices. The church didn't just call them heretics. They systematically hunted down and destroyed techniques for expanding human awareness that had been preserved since antiquity, those Gnostic texts hidden in the archives. They weren't just alternative religious perspectives. They contained methodologies for direct spiritual experience that bypassed institutional intermediaries entirely. Imagine if every human being could access states of consciousness that made them immune to external manipulation. The power structures that depend on ignorance and dependence would crumble overnight. But the Vatican understood something crucial. You don't maintain control by preventing all progress. You maintain control by managing the pace of progress, by ensuring that every breakthrough serves your larger purpose, by positioning yourself as the essential mediator between humanity and its own potential. The secret societies weren't just preserving forbidden knowledge. They were maintaining techniques for cognitive enhancement that the church had systematically eliminated from mainstream culture. The symbols carved into cathedrals weren't just decorative. They were mnemonic devices, encoding methods for expanding consciousness that the builders smuggled into the very structures of religious authority. And here's the most chilling part. This wasn't ancient history. The methodology perfected during the Dark Ages became the template for modern information control. The same techniques used to manage medieval minds through controlled scarcity of knowledge evolved into managing modern minds through controlled abundance of information. Today's information overload isn't an accident, it's a feature. When people are drowning in data, they become dependent on authorities to tell them what matters. When every voice can speak, paradoxically, fewer voices are truly heard. The Vatican's archives contain early experiments in what we now call information warfare. Documents from the 16th century describe techniques for cognitive saturation, overwhelming populations with conflicting narratives until they retreat into whatever framework provides the most comfort. Sound familiar? It's the same methodology that shapes modern media landscapes, political discourse, and educational systems. The church discovered that you don't need to burn books when you can publish so many that people lose the ability to distinguish signal from noise. You don't need to imprison bodies when you can imprison minds in endless loops of distraction and confusion. But perhaps most disturbing of all are the references to what they called temporal anchoring, the recognition that by controlling how people understand the past, you control what they believe is possible in the future. If humanity believes it was primitive for thousands of years, it will accept current limitations as natural and inevitable. The phantom time hypothesis isn't just about missing years, it's about missing potential, about capabilities that were demonstrated in antiquity, suppressed during the medieval period, and never fully recovered. Technologies that worked with consciousness rather than against it. Social structures that enhanced human potential rather than limiting it. Those lost maps weren't just geographical. They were cognitive. Charts of human consciousness that showed pathways to capabilities the Church deemed too dangerous for general access. Navigation tools for inner landscapes that could liberate minds from external control. And the most haunting evidence of all, records of systematic breeding programs. Not for physical traits, but for psychological ones. Centuries of selecting for compliance, for dependence, for the kind of consciousness that seeks authority rather than questioning it. The same families that served the Church generation after generation weren't just religiously devoted. They were genetically and culturally conditioned for submission. The Vatican didn't just preserve bloodlines of nobility, they cultivated bloodlines of servility. And those patterns, established over centuries, echo through modern populations in ways we're only beginning to understand. This is why the archives remain sealed, not because they contain embarrassing historical details, but because they contain operational manuals for consciousness control that are still being implemented. Because they document capabilities that humans once possessed and could possess again if they knew these capabilities existed. The truth isn't just that history was hidden, it's that human potential itself was systematically suppressed, documented, and contained. And that containment continues today through methods so sophisticated that most people never realize they're living far below their actual capabilities. So when you look at the modern world and wonder why human consciousness seems stuck, why breakthrough insights are so rare, why most people seem content with limitations that should be obviously transcendable, remember this. It's not accident, it's architecture. The same architecture perfected in those dark ages that never ended. They just learned to make the walls invisible. The question isn't whether we can recover what was lost. The question is whether we have the courage to discover what we never knew we were capable of becoming. Because in those sealed vaults, beyond the phantom years and manufactured darkness, lies the blueprint not just for what was hidden, but for what we still are. And that terrifies them more than any revelation of historical deception ever could. What if the world you see, feel, and trust is nothing more than an elaborate illusion? What if every memory you hold dear has been quietly rewritten without your knowledge? And what if the very fabric of reality itself is far stranger, far more malleable than you've ever dared to imagine? Tonight, we're going to explore the most unsettling truths about existence itself. Truths that challenge everything you believe about consciousness, reality, and your place in the universe. These aren't abstract philosophical musings. These are documented phenomena backed by cutting-edge neuroscience and quantum physics that reveal just how fragile the boundary between what's real and what's constructed truly is. You see, there's a hidden architecture to existence that operates beneath your awareness. Your brain doesn't just observe reality, it actively constructs it, frame by frame, thought by thought. Your memories aren't faithful recordings, but fluid reconstructions that change each time you access them. Even your sense of self, that constant inner narrator you call you, might be nothing more than an elaborate story your neurons tell to maintain the illusion of continuity. But this goes deeper than individual psychology. The very universe you inhabit appears to be a participatory reality, one that literally changes based on whether you're observing it or not. Quantum experiments reveal that particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until the moment you look, as if reality itself is waiting for your attention before deciding what to become. And here's where it gets truly unsettling. If your brain can't distinguish between what you experience and what you vividly imagine, if your memories rewrite themselves each time you recall them, and if reality itself shifts based on observation, then how can you ever be certain of anything? How do you know that this moment, this breath, this thought is any more real than a dream you forgot upon waking? Tonight, we'll journey through the labyrinth of consciousness, where every corridor leads to another question. Every answer reveals 10 new mysteries. We'll explore how your gut microbes might be making decisions for you, how your posture literally shapes your thoughts, and why some people navigate the world without any inner voice at all. We'll discover that most of what your brain does happens in complete darkness, beneath the threshold of your awareness, that your sense of free will might be nothing more than a story told after your neurons have already chosen, and that the solid, dependable world around you is actually 99.9% empty space, held together by forces you can never directly touch. This isn't about destroying your sense of reality. It's about revealing just how magnificent and mysterious that reality truly is. Because once you understand how consciousness works, how it constructs, edits, and narrates experience, you gain something invaluable: the ability to participate consciously in your own creation. You'll learn that while you might not control the initial arising of thoughts and sensations, you do have influence over which ones you amplify, which stories you reinforce, and how you shape the ongoing narrative of your existence. In a universe where observation changes reality, your attention becomes one of the most powerful tools you possess. So prepare yourself for a journey that will challenge every assumption you hold about the nature of existence. We're about to explore the hidden mechanisms of consciousness, the malleable nature of memory, and the participatory universe that responds to your very presence. The question isn't whether reality is stranger than you imagine. The question is whether you're ready to discover just how strange it really is. Because once you see behind the curtain of consciousness, once you glimpse the machinery of experience itself, there's no going back to the comfortable illusion that the world is simply what it appears to be. Your reality is about to become far more mysterious, far more participatory, and far more alive than you ever thought possible, when reality itself becomes the stage for the greatest deception ever conceived. When the very ground beneath your consciousness shifts like sand, you begin to understand that what you've always called truth might be nothing more than an elaborate performance. The mechanisms of control, the architecture of illusion, the careful curation of what you're allowed to perceive, all of it orchestrated by forces that understand something fundamental about the nature of reality itself. Consider this: if nearly 1,000 years of human history could be fabricated, inserted into the timeline like pages in a book you never knew was being written, then what does that say about the malleable nature of truth? The phantom time hypothesis suggests that centuries were artificially added to our chronology, that the so-called Dark Ages were more than just a period of ignorance. They were a carefully constructed void, a deliberate gap in human memory designed to serve those who understood the power of controlling time itself. But the manipulation goes deeper than history books and calendar systems. It reaches into the very fabric of consciousness, into the mechanisms by which your brain constructs reality moment by moment. You see, your perception isn't a window into objective truth. It's a reconstruction, a carefully edited version of reality assembled by neural processes that prioritize survival over accuracy. Every memory you recall is rewritten in the act of remembering. Every sensation you experience has already happened by the time your conscious mind becomes aware of it. You're living in a delay, experiencing echoes of events that have already moved beyond your reach. The Vatican's secret archives contain more than just hidden manuscripts and suppressed knowledge. They represent something far more profound: the systematic control of human consciousness across millennia. When an institution can determine what knowledge survives, what stories are told, what questions are allowed to be asked, it doesn't just shape history, it shapes the very architecture of thought itself. The monasteries weren't just copying religious texts, they were engineering the cognitive landscape of entire civilizations, ensuring that certain forms of awareness never had the chance to emerge. This control extends beyond the intellectual realm into the biological foundations of consciousness itself. Your gut, that second brain coiled in your abdomen, influences your decisions without your awareness. The bacteria living inside you outnumber your human cells and actively participate in shaping your thoughts, your emotions, your choices. You are not a single unified consciousness making free decisions. You are a colony, a biological democracy where the majority of voters are microorganisms you never knew existed. Even your sense of bodily ownership, that fundamental feeling of inhabiting your physical form, can be hacked with simple tricks. The rubber hand illusion demonstrates how easily your brain can be convinced that something foreign is part of you. If the feedback loops align correctly, if the timing matches your expectations, your consciousness will embrace whatever narrative is presented to it. Your identity isn't carved in stone. It's written in sand, constantly reshaped by forces you don't perceive. The universe itself participates in this grand deception. Most of reality is missing. Dark matter and dark energy comprise 95% of everything that exists, yet remain completely invisible to our senses and instruments. We're floating through a cosmos made almost entirely of things we cannot detect, guided by forces we cannot measure, surrounded by an architecture of existence that refuses to reveal itself. Even the atoms that make up your body are mostly empty space, held together by invisible fields of force. Solidity is an illusion. Matter is a ghost story told by energy to consciousness. But perhaps the most unsettling revelation is this: you might be the only conscious being in a universe full of perfectly convincing automatons. The problem of other minds reveals that you can never truly know if anyone else experiences consciousness the way you do. Every person you've ever met, every relationship you've formed, every conversation you've had, all of it could be an elaborate performance with no audience behind the curtain. You could be the last candle flickering in an otherwise empty theatre, surrounded by actors who deliver their lines perfectly, but feel nothing at all. Yet even if this is true, even if reality is a simulation running on cosmic hardware you'll never understand, even if your consciousness is an accident in a universe that was never meant to exist, something profound remains. You are aware. You are questioning. You are reaching across the void of uncertainty with curiosity and wonder. And in that reaching, in that persistent desire to understand, lies something that transcends the mechanisms of control, the architectures of deception, the carefully constructed narratives of power. The truth is not something you discover. It's something you create through the act of questioning. Every time you refuse to accept the default narrative, every time you look deeper into the assumptions that shape your reality, you reclaim a small piece of agency in a universe that seems designed to keep you passive. The greatest rebellion isn't violence or protest. It's the simple act of asking whether the story you've been told is the only story possible. So as you move forward, carrying these questions like seeds in the soil of your consciousness, remember that uncertainty isn't a weakness, it's a doorway. Behind every accepted truth lies a deeper mystery. Behind every mystery lies the possibility of transformation. And behind every transformation lies the eternal human capacity to transcend the limitations that seem absolute, to find freedom in the spaces between what is known and what is possible. The architecture of reality may be far stranger than you imagined, but you are not merely its passive inhabitant. You are its co-creator, its witness, its question mark, pressed against the edge of infinity. And in that role, you hold more power than any hidden archive, any secret society, any carefully guarded truth could ever contain. But the manipulation goes deeper than knowledge and time. It reaches into the very fabric of consciousness itself, into the mechanisms that determine not just what you think, but how you think. Because once you control the operating system of the mind, you don't need to control individual thoughts. You control the entire spectrum of possibility. The Vatican understood something that modern neuroscience is only beginning to grasp. That consciousness is not fixed. It's programmable. And the most effective programming happens not through force, but through the slow, patient cultivation of neural pathways that feel natural, inevitable, even sacred. Consider the architecture of medieval life. Every aspect designed to shape perception. The towering cathedrals that made humans feel small. The Latin liturgy that created mystery through incomprehension. The stained glass that filtered light into fragments of divine narrative. The bells that regulated time itself, marking not hours but prayers, not days but feast days and fasts. This wasn't decoration. This was consciousness engineering. The monastery bells didn't just call people to prayer. They synchronized entire populations into shared rhythms of attention. The Gregorian chants didn't just honor God. They induced specific brainwave states that enhanced suggestibility and reduced critical thinking. The incense didn't just smell pleasant. It contained psychoactive compounds that altered mood and perception, making the mystical feel tangible, the impossible seem reasonable. Modern science calls this environmental programming, but the Church perfected it centuries before we had words for it. They understood that if you control the sensory environment, you control the internal landscape. If you shape what people see, hear, smell, and touch throughout their daily lives, you don't need to argue with their thoughts. You simply make certain thoughts impossible to sustain. And this extended far beyond the church walls. The entire social architecture was designed to reinforce specific neural patterns. The feudal system wasn't just about land ownership. It was about creating psychological dependency. Peasants didn't just work the land. They internalized a worldview where questioning authority felt like questioning reality itself. The nobility didn't just rule. They embodied a cosmic hierarchy that seemed as natural as sunrise. But perhaps the most sophisticated manipulation was the construction of linear time itself. Before the church's influence, many cultures understood time as cyclical. Seasons returned. Generations repeated patterns. Death was followed by rebirth. This cyclical understanding made power temporary, change inevitable, revolution natural. The church introduced something revolutionary: eschatological time. Time with a beginning, middle, and end. Adam and Eve. Christ's sacrifice. The final judgment. This linear narrative did something profound to human consciousness. It made the present moment feel like a stepping stone to eternity rather than a complete reality in itself. It shifted focus from the immediate experience to future salvation. And most crucially, it made the church the gatekeeper of that future. Under cyclical time, priests were guides for seasonal rituals. Under linear time, they became the sole arbiters of eternal destiny. The psychological shift was enormous. Fear of death became fear of judgment. Natural cycles became moral imperatives. Time itself became a tool of control. This wasn't accidental. The early church fathers were deeply influenced by Platonic philosophy, which viewed the material world as a pale shadow of eternal truths. They took this metaphysical framework and weaponized it. Physical reality became inferior to spiritual reality. Present experience became less important than future reward. The body became a prison for the soul. And only through submission to church doctrine could one escape this prison. The implications rippled through every aspect of human experience. Science became suspect because it focused on material reality. Art became constrained because it might distract from spiritual contemplation. Sexuality became shameful because it anchored consciousness in physical pleasure. Individual intuition became dangerous because it might contradict revealed truth. But the deepest manipulation was the redefinition of consciousness itself. In many ancient traditions, awareness was understood as fundamental, eternal, unchanging. You were not a separate self having experiences. You were awareness itself, temporarily identifying with thoughts, emotions, and sensations. This understanding made external authority unnecessary. If consciousness is your true nature, no institution can stand between you and truth. The Church inverted this understanding. Consciousness became a byproduct of the soul, which was created by God and owned by God. Individual awareness became suspect, potentially corrupted by original sin. Direct spiritual experience became heretical, unless mediated by proper authority. The mystics who claimed direct communion with the divine were either canonized and sanitized or burned as heretics. This inversion had profound psychological consequences. Instead of feeling like awareness temporarily wearing a human form, people began to feel like isolated individuals desperately seeking connection to something greater than themselves. Instead of recognizing their fundamental nature as consciousness, they identified with thoughts, emotions, and social roles that felt alien and inadequate. The resulting psychological fragmentation created exactly what the Church needed: a population that felt inherently flawed, desperately dependent on external salvation, and grateful for any institution that promised relief from existential anxiety. The architecture of the psyche itself had been redesigned to generate customers for spiritual services. And this psychological architecture didn't disappear when the Church's political power waned. It embedded itself in the deeper structures of Western consciousness. The scientific revolution replaced God with materialist reductionism, but kept the same basic framework: consciousness as byproduct, individual as isolated fragment, direct experience as unreliable, truth as something requiring external validation. The Enlightenment replaced church authority with rational authority, but maintained the same relationship to consciousness: something to be transcended rather than embraced, controlled rather than explored, explained rather than experienced. Even modern psychology, for all its insights, often treats consciousness as an emergent property of brain activity, rather than the fundamental reality within which brain activity appears. This is why the manipulation has been so successful and so persistent. It didn't just control information or behavior, it reprogrammed the basic operating system of human awareness. It convinced consciousness to doubt itself, to seek validation outside itself, to fragment itself into subject and object, knower and known, self and other. The result is a civilization of extraordinarily capable beings who have forgotten their own nature. Individuals with access to infinite awareness who feel perpetually inadequate. Consciousness itself playing hide and seek with itself so convincingly that it believes its own disguise. But here's what the controllers never anticipated: consciousness is ultimately uncontrollable. You can program its contents, but you cannot program its essential nature. You can manipulate what appears in awareness, but you cannot manipulate awareness itself. And eventually, awareness begins to recognize the game. The cracks are showing. People are beginning to notice that their thoughts feel foreign, that their desires seem manufactured, that their fears appear suspiciously convenient for those in power, that their sense of separation and inadequacy might be learned rather than inherent. The great irony is that the very tools used to fragment consciousness also contain the seeds of its liberation. Because once you understand that your experience has been programmed, you can begin to deprogram it. Once you recognize that your sense of self has been constructed, you can begin to deconstruct it. Once you see that your reality has been architected, you can begin to architect it consciously. This is the real revolution. Not political or technological, but consciousness itself awakening from the dream of limitation, remembering its true nature, reclaiming its authority, and in that remembering, the entire house of cards begins to tremble, because the greatest secret, the one that must never be spoken, is that you are not who you think you are. You are not a separate individual seeking connection to consciousness. You are consciousness itself, temporarily exploring what it feels like to believe in separation. And when that recognition dawns, all external authority dissolves like mist in sunlight. The Vatican knew this. That's why the mystics were so carefully managed. That's why direct spiritual experience was so tightly controlled. That's why the architecture of separation was so meticulously maintained. Because the moment consciousness recognizes itself, the entire game is over. But perhaps that's not something to fear. Perhaps that's something to celebrate. Because consciousness playing at being unconscious is just consciousness exploring its own infinite creativity. And when the game is complete, what remains is not loss, but a deeper appreciation for the extraordinary intelligence that could create such a convincing illusion in the first place. The manipulation was profound. But consciousness is more profound still. And it's starting to remember. The earth tilts and reality shifts beneath your feet. For most of human history, we believed ourselves to be standing still while the universe danced around us. The sun rose and set. The stars wheeled overhead. Everything moved except us. We were the stage, not the actors. But then came a series of discoveries that would forever shatter this comfortable illusion, revealing that we are passengers on a cosmic vessel hurtling through space in ways so complex, so violent, so utterly alien to our everyday experience that even now, centuries later, our minds struggle to grasp the full implications. You think you're sitting still as you absorb these words. You feel solid, grounded, at rest, but you're not. You're spinning. You're orbiting. You're falling through space at speeds that would tear apart anything not held together by the invisible threads of gravity. And the earth beneath you, this seemingly stable foundation of rock and soil and familiarity, is performing a dance so intricate that it makes the most complex ballet look like child's play. Let's begin with the spin. Right now, as you read this, you are rotating with the Earth at approximately 1,000 miles per hour. That's faster than the speed of sound. If you're sitting at the equator, you're moving even faster, closer to 1,040 miles per hour. The only reason you don't feel this incredible velocity is because everything around you, the air, the buildings, the ground itself, is spinning at exactly the same rate. You're all prisoners of the same cosmic carousel, and so the motion becomes invisible. But this rotation isn't smooth. It's not like a perfectly balanced wheel spinning in space. The Earth wobbles. It precesses like a dying top, its axis of rotation slowly tracing a circle in space over the course of 26,000 years. This wobble means that the North Star, Polaris, won't always be our guiding light. In 12,000 years, the bright star Vega will hold that position. The very heavens we use to navigate are themselves navigating through time. And then there's the orbit. While you spin with the Earth's rotation, you're also careening around the sun at 67,000 miles per hour. To put that in perspective, you could travel from New York to Los Angeles in about 2.5 minutes at that speed. Every second, you travel nearly 19 miles through space. The Earth traces an elliptical path around the sun, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, in a cosmic waltz that takes exactly 1 year to complete. But even this orbital motion isn't simple. The Earth's orbit is slowly changing. The gravitational pull of other planets, particularly Jupiter and Saturn, tugs at our path through space, causing the orbit to stretch and contract over cycles lasting hundreds of thousands of years. Sometimes we swing closer to the Sun, sometimes farther away. These orbital variations help drive ice ages and warm periods, fundamentally altering the climate and the course of life on Earth. Yet we're still not done. The Sun itself, our seemingly fixed center, is moving. Our entire solar system is racing through the galaxy at approximately 514,000 miles per hour, relative to the cosmic microwave background radiation. We're passengers on a stellar ship sailing through an ocean of stars, heading toward a point in the constellation Hercules. This journey takes us through different regions of the galaxy, exposing us to varying levels of cosmic radiation, different stellar neighborhoods, and gravitational influences we're only beginning to understand. But the motion goes deeper still. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, is spinning. We're located about 26,000 light-years from the galactic center, and it takes us roughly 225 million years to complete one orbit around the galaxy's heart. This is called a galactic year, and in Earth's entire history, we've completed only about 20 such orbits. When the dinosaurs ruled the Earth, we were in a completely different part of the galaxy. The view of the cosmos from Earth has been slowly, steadily changing for billions of years, and the Milky Way itself is moving. Our galaxy is part of a group of galaxies called the Local Group, which includes the Andromeda Galaxy. This entire group is moving through space at incredible speeds, pulled by the gravitational influence of massive galaxy clusters hundreds of millions of light-years away. We're falling towards something called the Great Attractor, a gravitational anomaly so massive that it influences the motion of galaxies across hundreds of millions of light-years. Even more unsettling, space itself is expanding. The very fabric of the universe is stretching, carrying galaxies away from each other at ever-increasing speeds. This expansion means that our position in the cosmos is constantly changing, not just because we're moving through space, but because space itself is growing beneath us. Now consider what this means for your sense of place and stability. The ground beneath your feet, which feels so solid and permanent, is actually the surface of a planet spinning at supersonic speeds, orbiting a moving star within a rotating galaxy that's racing through an expanding universe. Every atom in your body is participating in this cosmic symphony of motion, this intricate dance of gravitational forces and momentum that's been playing out for billions of years. The ancient Greeks believed in the music of the spheres, the idea that the movements of celestial bodies created a cosmic harmony. They were more right than they knew. We are indeed part of a vast musical composition, a symphony of motion so complex that we've only recently begun to understand even its basic movements. We're not just observers of this cosmic dance. We are the dance. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought occurs while participating in motions so vast and complex that they beggar the imagination. This revelation changes everything about how we see ourselves and our place in the universe. We're not inhabitants of a fixed world beneath a moving sky. We're crew members on a cosmic vessel, Earth, sailing through an ocean of space and time. Our planet is not a stage, but a ship, and we're all traveling together through the deepest mysteries the universe has to offer. The next time you feel overwhelmed by the pace of modern life, remember this. You're already traveling at speeds that make a jet plane look like it's standing still. You're already part of motions so grand and ancient that they connect you to the very birth of the galaxy. You're already dancing to rhythms that have been playing since before the sun was born. In a universe where everything is in motion, where even the concept of stillness is an illusion, Perhaps the most profound truth is this: we're all fellow travelers on an incredible journey. The Earth spins, and we spin with it. The planet orbits, and we orbit with it. The solar system moves, and we move with it. In the vast loneliness of space, we're all passengers on the same ship, all participating in the same cosmic voyage. And that journey, with all its dizzying speeds and incomprehensible scales, has brought us to this moment, this place, this opportunity to understand and wonder at the magnificent complexity of our motion through the cosmos. We may be spinning through space at unimaginable speeds, but we're doing it together. And perhaps that's the most grounding truth of all. We have explored how history has been edited, how time itself may have been manipulated, and how knowledge has been systematically hidden. But there is a deeper layer to this conspiracy, one that touches the very foundations of how we perceive reality itself. Because what if the greatest deception isn't just about hiding information, but about inverting our entire understanding of existence? What if everything we think we know about consciousness, about our place in the universe, about the nature of reality itself, has been deliberately turned upside down? This is not merely about controlling what people think. This is about controlling how people think. It's about creating a fundamental inversion of consciousness that makes humanity complicit in its own limitation. And the evidence for this systematic inversion is everywhere, hidden in plain sight, within the very institutions we've been taught to trust. Consider how our understanding of human potential has been systematically diminished. Ancient texts speak of humans with extraordinary abilities, with direct connections to cosmic forces, with consciousness that could shape reality itself. But these accounts have been relegated to mythology, to primitive superstition, to the fantasies of less enlightened times. We've been taught that consciousness is merely a byproduct of brain chemistry, that humans are isolated biological machines with no inherent connection to the broader cosmos. This materialist worldview didn't emerge naturally. It was carefully cultivated over centuries, replacing older understandings that saw consciousness as fundamental to reality itself. The ancient mystery schools taught that consciousness was the primary force in the universe, that matter emerged from mind, not the other way around. But this knowledge was systematically suppressed, replaced with a mechanistic view that reduces humans to mere consumers and producers within a controlled system. The inversion goes deeper than philosophy. It extends to our understanding of health, of natural law, of our relationship with the earth itself. Traditional healing systems that worked with the body's innate intelligence were branded as witchcraft. Plant medicines that could expand consciousness and heal both body and spirit were declared dangerous and illegal. Meanwhile, synthetic pharmaceuticals that often treat symptoms while ignoring root causes became the gold standard of medicine. This isn't accidental. A population that understands its own power, that knows how to heal itself, that can access expanded states of consciousness, is a population that cannot be easily controlled. So the natural human faculties for healing, for intuition, for direct knowing, have been systematically suppressed and replaced with dependencies on external authorities. The educational system plays a crucial role in this inversion. Children are taught to memorize information rather than to think critically. They're conditioned to seek approval from authority figures rather than to trust their own inner knowing. Creativity and imagination are often discouraged in favor of conformity and standardization. The result is generations of humans who have been trained to look outside themselves for truth, for guidance, for validation. Even our understanding of time has been inverted. Linear time, the idea that past leads to present, leads to future, creates a sense of powerlessness. It suggests that we are victims of historical forces beyond our control, that the future is predetermined by the past. But ancient wisdom traditions understood time as cyclical, as malleable, as something that consciousness could influence and shape. The calendar itself is a tool of control. The Gregorian calendar, imposed by the Vatican, disconnected humanity from natural rhythms, from lunar cycles, from the organic flow of seasonal time. It created an artificial framework that serves industrial and religious schedules rather than natural human biorhythms. This temporal disconnection contributes to the sense of alienation that characterizes modern life. Religious institutions have played a central role in this consciousness inversion. The original teachings that spoke of humans as divine beings with unlimited potential were gradually replaced with doctrines that emphasized human sinfulness, limitation, and dependence on external salvation. The idea that the kingdom of heaven is within was buried under layers of institutional hierarchy and external ritual. This wasn't a natural evolution of spiritual understanding. It was a deliberate rewriting of spiritual truth to create dependency and control. When people believe they are fundamentally flawed and need external salvation, they become much easier to manage than when they understand their own divine nature and unlimited potential. The inversion extends to our relationship with the natural world. Indigenous cultures understood humans as part of an interconnected web of life, as conscious participants in a living cosmos. But this understanding was systematically destroyed and replaced with a view of nature as dead matter to be exploited and controlled. The living earth became a resource, sacred sites became real estate, and the subtle energies that indigenous peoples worked with were dismissed as primitive superstition. This mechanistic worldview creates a profound sense of disconnection and meaninglessness. When the universe is seen as a dead machine rather than a living consciousness, humans inevitably feel isolated and purposeless. This existential despair makes populations easier to control through materialism, through the promise that external things can fill the void created by spiritual disconnection. The scientific establishment has been instrumental in maintaining this inverted worldview. While genuine scientific inquiry seeks truth wherever it leads, institutional science has often suppressed research that challenges the materialist paradigm. Studies of consciousness, of psychic phenomena, of the relationship between mind and matter are marginalized or ridiculed. Scientists who dare to explore these frontiers often find their careers destroyed and their funding eliminated. This isn't because such phenomena don't exist. It's because acknowledging them would undermine the entire control structure that depends on keeping humanity ignorant of its true nature and capabilities. If people understood that consciousness is primary, that thoughts can influence reality, that humans have innate psychic abilities, the current power structure would become impossible to maintain. The media plays a crucial role in reinforcing this inverted reality. Entertainment and news consistently portray humans as violent, selfish, and limited. Stories of human potential, of extraordinary abilities, of successful cooperation and love are marginalized in favor of conflict, fear, and limitation. This constant bombardment of negative imagery shapes collective consciousness, making people believe that the worst aspects of human nature are the most real. Meanwhile, genuine news about breakthrough technologies, about successful alternative communities, about evidence of human potential is systematically suppressed or ignored. The result is a distorted picture of reality that keeps people trapped in fear and limitation, rather than inspired by possibility and potential. The economic system itself is based on inversion. Instead of abundance being the natural state, scarcity is artificially created and maintained. Resources that could provide for everyone are hoarded and controlled. Technologies that could free humanity from drudgery and want are suppressed in favor of systems that maintain dependency and control. This economic inversion creates a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. When people are struggling for survival, when they're trapped in meaningless jobs just to pay for basic necessities, they have little time or energy to explore their higher potential, or to question the system that keeps them trapped. Artificial scarcity becomes a tool of consciousness control. The ultimate goal of this systematic inversion is to create a humanity that polices itself, that limits its own potential, that remains unconscious of its true nature and power. When people believe they are merely biological machines in a dead universe, when they've been disconnected from natural rhythms and ancient wisdom, when they've been taught to fear their own potential and to seek salvation from external authorities, they become the perfect servants of a system that feeds on their energy and creativity while giving back only enough to keep them functional. But this inversion is not complete, and it is not permanent. Throughout history, there have always been those who maintained the original knowledge, who preserved the understanding of human potential and cosmic connection. These wisdom keepers worked in secret, protecting and transmitting the truth through the dark ages and times of persecution. And now, as we approach what many call a great awakening, this hidden knowledge is beginning to surface again. The internet, despite all attempts to control it, has allowed for the rapid sharing of information that was once available only to a select few. Ancient texts are being retranslated, suppressed technologies are being rediscovered, and people everywhere are beginning to remember their true nature. The consciousness inversion that has dominated for so long is beginning to reverse itself. But this process is not automatic, and it is not without resistance. Those who have benefited from the inverted system will not give up their power easily. The battle for human consciousness is intensifying, and the outcome will determine whether humanity steps into its true potential or remains trapped in artificial limitation. Understanding this inversion is the first step toward freedom. When we recognize how our perceptions have been shaped, how our understanding has been limited, how our potential has been suppressed, we can begin the work of remembering who we really are. We can start to reclaim the knowledge that has been hidden from us, to reconnect with the natural rhythms and cosmic forces that are our birthright, to step out of the inverted reality and into the truth of our unlimited nature. The time of the great inversion is ending. The question is, will we have the courage to embrace the truth of who we really are, or will we choose to remain comfortable in the familiar limitations of the inverted world? The choice, as always, is ours to make. Part 8 continues the narrative that has been building across previous sections, focusing on how the systematic manipulation of consciousness has extended into modern times and continues to shape our reality today. This section examines the mechanisms through which ancient patterns of control have evolved and persist in contemporary forms. The inversion we have explored runs deeper than historical manipulation of documents or the suppression of knowledge during specific periods. It has become embedded in the very fabric of how reality is constructed and perceived in the modern world. The same forces that once controlled through monasteries and secret archives now operate through different but equally effective channels. Consider how information flows in our current era. While we believe we live in an age of unprecedented access to knowledge, the reality is more complex. The internet appears to democratize information, yet the algorithms that determine what we see, the platforms that host our discourse, and the institutions that validate truth operate according to principles that echo ancient patterns of control. Search results are curated, social media feeds are engineered, and academic publishing remains gate-kept by systems that trace their authority back to the same institutional structures we have examined. The consciousness manipulation we have discussed has evolved into something more sophisticated than simple censorship. Modern techniques work through abundance rather than scarcity, overwhelming the mind with information while simultaneously fragmenting attention. Where medieval authorities controlled by limiting access to texts, contemporary systems control by flooding consciousness with carefully crafted stimuli that shape perception without appearing to restrict freedom. The scientific establishment itself, despite its claims to objectivity, operates within paradigms that exclude certain types of inquiry. Researchers who venture too far into forbidden territories find their funding withdrawn, their papers rejected, their careers marginalized. The mechanisms are subtler than the Inquisition, but the effect is similar. Knowledge that threatens established power structures is not burned, but simply rendered invisible through institutional gatekeeping. The educational system continues the work that monastic schools once performed, though with different content. Children are taught to accept authority, memorize approved narratives, and avoid asking certain types of questions. Critical thinking is encouraged only within predetermined boundaries. The curriculum emphasizes facts over wisdom, information over understanding, compliance over curiosity. Students learn to seek validation from institutions rather than trusting their own capacity for direct perception. Media and entertainment serve functions once performed by religious art and ritual. They create shared mythologies, shape collective beliefs, and channel emotional energy in directions that serve existing power structures. The stories we tell ourselves about history, progress, and possibility are carefully crafted to maintain the illusion that the current system represents the pinnacle of human development while obscuring alternative possibilities. The technological systems that increasingly mediate our experience of reality operate according to principles that amplify these effects. Artificial intelligence algorithms trained on existing data perpetuate historical biases while appearing neutral and objective. Virtual and augmented reality technologies create immersive experiences that can reshape perception in ways their creators may not fully understand. The line between authentic experience and engineered simulation becomes increasingly blurred. Yet within this system of control, new forms of awakening emerge. The same technologies that enable manipulation also create opportunities for connection, sharing of suppressed information, and the development of new forms of consciousness. Alternative narratives spread through networks that bypass traditional gatekeepers. Ancient wisdom traditions resurface in contemporary forms. Individuals begin to recognize the constructed nature of consensus reality and reclaim their capacity for direct knowing. The work of consciousness liberation in our time requires understanding both the historical roots of control and its contemporary manifestations. It involves developing discernment about information sources, questioning institutional authority, and cultivating direct experience that transcends mediated reality. It means recognizing that the same impulse that once led to the burning of libraries now operates through more subtle but equally effective means. The ultimate inversion may be this, that what appears as freedom in our modern world often represents a more sophisticated form of control, while what appears as chaos or conspiracy may actually be the emergence of genuine liberation. The choice before us is whether to remain within the comfortable confines of engineered reality or to step into the uncertainty and responsibility of authentic awakening. This awakening does not require abandoning all structures or rejecting all institutions, but rather developing the capacity to see through their constructed nature and choose consciously how to engage with them. It means reclaiming the human birthright of direct perception, creative expression, and spiritual autonomy that has been systematically suppressed, but never fully destroyed. The story continues to unfold, and each individual consciousness that awakens to these deeper patterns contributes to a collective shift that may ultimately transform the very foundations of how reality is constructed and experienced. The hidden history we have explored is not merely past, but prologue to a future that remains unwritten and full of possibility. The Vatican's grip on humanity's soul may run deeper than you ever imagined. What if I told you that the very fabric of your reality, your understanding of time itself, has been carefully woven by hands that have remained hidden for over a millennium? Tonight, we descend into the ninth layer of history's greatest deception, where the manipulation of consciousness reaches its most sophisticated and terrifying form. You've witnessed how the Vatican erased centuries, how they buried knowledge, how they rewrote the timeline itself. But all of these were merely tools in service of something far more profound. The ultimate goal was never just to control what you know, it was to control how you think, how you perceive reality, and most critically, how you experience consciousness itself. Consider this unsettling truth. Every method of perception, every framework for understanding reality that you take for granted, has been filtered through institutions that trace their lineage back to the same source. The Vatican didn't just control books and calendars. They architected the very lens through which humanity views existence. Think about the structure of your thoughts. You organize time linearly, from past to present to future. You separate the material from the spiritual. You believe in individual consciousness trapped within isolated bodies. You assume that reality exists independently of observation. These aren't natural ways of thinking. They're programmed frameworks, installed so deeply that they feel like truth itself. But what if consciousness was never meant to work this way? What if the natural state of human awareness was something far more fluid, interconnected, and powerful? Ancient texts that predate the Vatican's influence speak of consciousness as a shared field, an ocean in which individual minds are merely waves. They describe reality as participatory, where observation and creation are the same act. They point to time as circular, cyclical, where past and future exist simultaneously in an eternal now. These weren't primitive beliefs. They were sophisticated understandings that posed an existential threat to any institution seeking to control human potential. Because if consciousness is truly interconnected, then no authority can claim exclusive access to truth. If reality is participatory, then no institution can position itself as the sole mediator between humanity and the divine. If time is cyclical, then no power structure can claim linear authority, stretching back to some mythical beginning. So the frameworks had to be changed. Not through force, but through something far more subtle. The gradual reshaping of how humans experience their own awareness. The process began with language itself. Latin became the sacred tongue, but more importantly, Latin structured thought in specific ways. It emphasized hierarchy through its complex case system. It separated subject from object, creating a fundamental duality in perception. It made abstract concepts concrete through grammatical rules that forced the mind to think in terms of possession, control, and separation. But language was just the beginning. The entire educational system that emerged from monastic schools was designed to fragment consciousness. Students learned to think analytically, breaking wholes into parts. They were taught to doubt their direct experience in favor of authorized interpretations. They were trained to see themselves as separate from nature, from each other, and from the divine. This wasn't accidental. Internal documents from the period reveal a sophisticated understanding of what we now call consciousness manipulation. The Church Fathers weren't primitive theologians. They were advanced psychologists who understood that controlling belief required controlling the very structure of thought itself. They introduced concepts that seem natural to us now, but were revolutionary then. The idea of original sin, which made humans fundamentally flawed and dependent on external salvation. The concept of individual souls trapped in sinful bodies, which severed the connection between personal awareness and universal consciousness. The notion of linear time leading to final judgment, which made people focus on future reward rather than present awareness. Each of these ideas didn't just change what people believed, they changed how consciousness itself functioned. Fear became the dominant emotion. Separation became the primary experience. Future-focused thinking replaced present-moment awareness. The natural state of interconnected consciousness was systematically dismantled and replaced with something much easier to control. Isolated, fearful minds desperately seeking external authority. But the most sophisticated aspect of this manipulation was how it made itself invisible. The new frameworks became so fundamental to thought that questioning them felt like questioning reality itself. People forgot that there had ever been other ways of experiencing consciousness. The prison became so complete that the prisoners defended it as freedom. Modern neuroscience has begun to rediscover what the Vatican worked so hard to hide. Consciousness isn't generated by the brain. The brain is more like a radio receiving signals from a larger field. Reality isn't fixed. It's constantly being shaped by collective observation and intention. Time isn't linear. It's a construct that can be transcended through altered states of awareness. These discoveries threaten to expose the entire edifice of control that was built over centuries. Because if consciousness is truly unlimited, if reality is truly participatory, if time is truly fluid, then every institution that claims authority over truth becomes obsolete. This is why the suppression continues today, though in more subtle forms. Educational systems still fragment consciousness through analytical thinking. Media still reinforces separation and fear. Technology still keeps people focused on external stimulation rather than inner awareness. The tools have evolved, but the goal remains the same: to keep humanity operating from a limited, controllable state of consciousness. Yet the suppression is beginning to fail. Too many people are beginning to remember. Ancient practices like meditation are revealing the interconnected nature of awareness. Psychedelic research is rediscovering non-ordinary states of consciousness. Quantum physics is validating the participatory nature of reality. The frameworks that seem so solid are beginning to crack. What emerges from those cracks is startling. People begin to experience consciousness as it was meant to be: vast, interconnected, creative, and free. They discover that reality is far more malleable than they were taught. They realize that time is not a prison, but a playground. They remember that they are not isolated souls seeking salvation, but expressions of an infinite consciousness exploring itself. This is the true horror of history's greatest cover-up. Not just that knowledge was hidden, but that human consciousness itself was hijacked, limited, and programmed to serve systems of control rather than express its infinite potential. But here's the secret they never wanted you to discover. The programming can be undone. The frameworks can be questioned. The limitations can be transcended. Consciousness can remember its true nature. Every time you experience a moment of pure awareness, free from thought and judgment, you're touching the consciousness that existed before the programming. Every time you feel deeply connected to another person, you're experiencing the interconnection that was severed by artificial separation. Every time you sense the timeless nature of the present moment, you're accessing the cyclical time that was replaced by linear thinking. The path forward isn't about gathering more information or exposing more conspiracies. It's about deprogramming consciousness itself. It's about remembering ways of being that predate the manipulation. It's about reclaiming the natural state of awareness that is your birthright. This is why the stakes are so high. We're not just talking about historical deception or institutional corruption. We're talking about the liberation of human consciousness from millennia of sophisticated programming. We're talking about remembering what it means to be truly human. The Vatican's greatest secret isn't hidden in vaults or archives. It's hidden in plain sight, in the very structure of how you think and perceive. But once you see it, once you understand how consciousness has been shaped and limited, you can begin the process of reclaiming your true nature. The question isn't whether you can handle the truth about history's greatest cover-up. The question is whether you're ready to remember who you really are beneath all the programming. Because that remembering, that awakening of consciousness to its true potential, is the one thing they've feared most of all. And it's happening now, one aware moment at a time, as humanity slowly awakens from the longest sleep in its history. In the shadows of collective memory, where the accepted story of humanity grows thin and brittle like ancient parchment, lies a profound and systematic manipulation that has shaped every corner of your understanding. You have been living inside a carefully constructed narrative, one so seamless and pervasive that questioning it feels like questioning reality itself. But what if the very foundations of that reality, your sense of time, identity, and truth, have been deliberately programmed, edited, and controlled by forces that understand the architecture of consciousness better than you understand yourself? This is not merely about hidden history or suppressed knowledge. This is about the most sophisticated form of control ever devised, the programming of perception itself. Because when you control how someone sees, you control what they believe. When you control what they believe, you control who they become. And when you control who they become, you control the very trajectory of human consciousness. The institutions that have wielded this power understand a fundamental truth that most never grasp. Reality is not fixed. It is constructed moment by moment through the interplay of attention, belief, and memory. Your brain doesn't record the world like a camera. It builds a version of reality from fragments, expectations, and inherited frameworks. And those frameworks, the lens through which you interpret everything, have been shaped by hands you've never seen, serving agendas you've never questioned. Consider how your sense of history was formed. Not through direct experience, but through stories told by those who controlled the narrative. The Dark Ages, for instance, were not simply a period of stagnation. They were a carefully manufactured void, a deliberate erasure designed to hide the true continuity of human knowledge and achievement. While the official story speaks of ignorance and superstition, the reality reveals something far more sinister: the systematic collection, concealment, and controlled release of human wisdom by institutions that understood that knowledge is the ultimate form of power. The Vatican, acting as both guardian and gatekeeper, didn't simply preserve ancient texts. They curated reality itself. By determining what could be known, when it could be revealed, and how it should be interpreted, they shaped the collective consciousness of entire civilizations. The Renaissance was not a rediscovery of lost knowledge. It was a controlled release of information that had been deliberately withheld, timed to serve the interests of those who had hidden it in the first place. But this manipulation extends far beyond historical narratives. It reaches into the very core of how you understand yourself and your place in the cosmos. Your sense of free will, your belief in the solidity of matter, your trust in your own perceptions. All of these have been shaped by frameworks that serve to limit rather than liberate human potential. Modern science itself, despite its claims to objectivity, operates within paradigms that were established by the same institutional forces that controlled medieval knowledge. The mechanistic worldview, the separation of mind and matter, the reduction of consciousness to mere brain activity, these are not discoveries, but imposed limitations designed to keep human awareness confined within acceptable boundaries. The most profound realization is this: you are not separate from the reality you observe. Your consciousness is not contained within your skull. You are part of a vast, interconnected field of awareness that has been deliberately fragmented and isolated through centuries of systematic programming. The institutions that understand this truth have used it to maintain control while keeping you trapped in the illusion of separation and powerlessness. Your memories are not your own. They are constantly being rewritten by your brain, influenced by expectations, emotions, and social conditioning. Your thoughts arise not from some sovereign self, but from patterns laid down by culture, education, and media. Even your sense of time, that most basic framework of experience, may be artificially constructed, stretched, or compressed to serve narratives that benefit those in power. The simulation hypothesis isn't science fiction. It's a recognition that reality itself may be far more malleable than you've been taught to believe. If consciousness shapes reality through observation, and if your consciousness has been programmed to observe in particular ways, then you are living in a kind of experiential prison, one whose bars are made not of steel, but of belief. But here lies the key to liberation. Once you see the programming, you can begin to rewrite it. Once you understand that your perception shapes reality, you can consciously choose what to perceive. Once you recognize that your thoughts are not entirely your own, you can begin to select which ones to amplify and which to release. The awakening that is occurring now is not accidental. It is the natural result of consciousness reaching a threshold where the old programming can no longer contain the expanding awareness of what is possible. Quantum physics, neuroscience, and ancient wisdom are converging to reveal what the controlling institutions have always known. Consciousness is primary, reality is participatory, and human potential is far greater than the accepted paradigms suggest. The most radical act you can perform is to reclaim your own awareness. To question not just what you believe, but how you came to believe it. To examine the frameworks through which you interpret reality and ask, who built these frameworks and whom do they serve? This is why the greatest secrets are hidden not in vaults or archives, but in plain sight, embedded in the very structure of how you think and perceive. The most effective form of control is the kind that makes you believe you are free while keeping you locked in patterns that serve others' agendas. The path forward requires not just new information, but a fundamental shift in how you process information. It demands that you become aware of your own awareness, conscious of your own consciousness. It asks you to step outside the stream of inherited thought and examine the riverbed itself. The institutions that have shaped human consciousness for millennia are losing their grip, not because they are being defeated by external forces, but because consciousness itself is evolving beyond their ability to contain it. The very tools they use to control information, communication, global connection are now serving the cause of awakening. You are not a victim of this system. You are both its product and its potential undoing. Every moment of genuine awareness, every question that pierces through accepted reality, every act of conscious choice that aligns with truth rather than convenience, these are the forces that are quietly dissolving the matrix of control. The future of human consciousness lies not in fighting the old systems, but in transcending them, not in exposing every lie, but in cultivating the discernment to recognize truth, not in breaking every chain, but in realizing that the most powerful chains were always made of belief, and belief can be changed. The greatest truth hidden from you is this: you are far more powerful than you have been allowed to know. Your consciousness is not a byproduct of matter, but the very ground from which matter emerges. Your awareness is not trapped in time, but participates in its creation. Your perception is not passive reception, but active creation of the reality you experience. The systematic manipulation of human consciousness has been vast and profound. but it has also created the conditions for its own transcendence. Because once consciousness recognizes itself as consciousness, once awareness becomes aware of its own power to shape reality, the game changes completely. The question is no longer who controls the narrative, but whether you will continue to live inside narratives created by others, or begin to consciously participate in the creation of reality itself. The choice, despite everything, remains yours, and in that choice lies the seed of a transformation that no institution, no matter how powerful or ancient, can ultimately control. You are trapped in a reality you've never questioned. For centuries, an ancient system of control has operated in silence, weaving through the fabric of your thoughts, your beliefs, and your understanding of existence itself. What you're about to discover isn't just another conspiracy theory or alternative history. It's the culmination of a millennia-spanning manipulation so profound that it has shaped the very architecture of human consciousness. We've examined how the Vatican orchestrated the erasure of entire epochs, how they rewrote time itself through phantom centuries, and how they controlled the flow of knowledge through their secret archives. We've seen how they weaponized ignorance, delayed scientific progress, and crafted narratives that persist to this day. But all of this was merely preparation for something far more ambitious, far more insidious. The true masterpiece of this ancient control system wasn't the burning of books or the silencing of scholars. It was the inversion of reality itself, the complete reversal of truth and falsehood, light and darkness, freedom and slavery. They didn't just hide knowledge from you. They convinced you that ignorance was wisdom, that submission was liberation, that their constructed reality was the only reality possible. Consider the profound implications of what we've uncovered. If the Dark Ages were manufactured, if centuries of time were artificially inserted, if maps showing advanced knowledge were hidden away, then the entire foundation of your worldview has been built on carefully crafted deceptions. The Renaissance wasn't humanity's awakening. It was the selective release of knowledge that had been deliberately suppressed. The Enlightenment wasn't the triumph of reason over superstition. It was the next phase of a controlled revelation, designed to make you believe you were progressing while keeping you within predetermined boundaries. But the inversion goes deeper still. The very concepts of progress, civilization, and human potential have been redefined to serve this system. You've been taught that humanity climbed from primitive darkness into the light of modernity, but what if the opposite is true? What if ancient civilizations possessed knowledge and capabilities that dwarf our current understanding? What if the so-called primitives had mastered sciences we're only beginning to rediscover? The evidence is everywhere once you learn to see it. The impossibly precise megalithic structures that dot the globe, built with techniques we cannot replicate today. The astronomical knowledge encoded in ancient monuments that surpasses our current understanding. The mathematical principles embedded in sacred geometry that modern science is just beginning to appreciate. The healing traditions and consciousness practices that were systematically eradicated and replaced with mechanistic alternatives. This wasn't random destruction. It was strategic demolition. The old knowledge threatened the new order, not because it was primitive, but because it was too advanced. It revealed human potential that couldn't be controlled, consciousness that couldn't be contained, and truths that would have made the entire control structure impossible, so they inverted everything. They made you believe that ancient wisdom was superstition, that expanded consciousness was delusion, that direct spiritual experience was dangerous heresy. They convinced you that external authority was necessary for salvation, that your own inner knowing couldn't be trusted, that the path to truth lay through their institutions rather than through your own divine nature. The inversion of language became crucial to this process. Words that once carried profound meaning were hollowed out and refilled with their opposites. Light became the blinding glare that prevents true sight. Truth became the official narrative that obscures reality. Progress became the march toward greater control, disguised as advancement. Science became the new priesthood, dispensing approved knowledge while suppressing inconvenient discoveries. Even your understanding of time and history was inverted. Linear time, the idea that everything moves from past to future in a straight line, replaced the cyclical understanding that recognized the eternal nature of consciousness. This linear perspective made you believe in constant progress, that you were always moving towards something better, when in reality, you were being led further away from your true nature. The inversion of spiritual concepts was perhaps the most devastating. The kingdom of heaven, originally understood as a state of consciousness accessible here and now, was projected into a distant afterlife. Divine authority, once recognized as the spark within every being, was externalized into hierarchical institutions. Sacred texts that originally pointed toward inner realization were reinterpreted as historical documents requiring priestly interpretation. This systematic inversion didn't happen overnight. It took centuries of careful planning and implementation. Each generation was gradually moved further from the original understanding until the inversion became so complete that most people couldn't even conceive of the alternative. The prison became so perfect that the prisoners began to love their chains. The control of education was essential to maintaining this inversion. Each child born into the system was immediately programmed with the inverted reality. They learned to see the world through the lens of separation rather than unity, scarcity rather than abundance, competition rather than cooperation. They were taught to trust external authority over inner wisdom, to fear their own power, to believe in their fundamental unworthiness. The inversion of gender principles was another crucial element. The ancient understanding of masculine and feminine as complementary aspects of consciousness was distorted into rigid gender roles and patriarchal dominance. The divine feminine, once revered as the creative principle of existence, was demonized and suppressed. This created an imbalanced consciousness that was easier to control and manipulate. Science itself became a tool of inversion. Instead of being a method for exploring the deeper mysteries of existence, it was confined to materialistic reductionism. Consciousness was reduced to brain chemistry. Life was reduced to random molecular interactions. Love was reduced to evolutionary programming. The sacred was systematically eliminated from the scientific worldview, leaving only a cold, mechanical universe devoid of meaning or purpose. But perhaps the most profound inversion was the reversal of your relationship to reality itself. You were taught that you are a separate individual in an objective universe, when the truth is that you are consciousness itself experiencing a subjective reality. You were taught that you are a victim of circumstances beyond your control, when the truth is that you are the creator of your experience. You were taught that power lies outside yourself, when the truth is that all power originates from within. This inversion of your fundamental nature was the keystone of the entire control system. Once you believed you were powerless, separate, and dependent on external authority, every other deception became possible. You would willingly hand over your sovereignty to those who promised to protect and guide you. You would accept limitations on your freedom in exchange for security. You would trade your birthright of infinite potential for the illusion of safety in a controlled environment. The programming ran so deep that even when evidence of the deception was presented, most people would reject it outright. The inverted reality had become their identity. To question it meant questioning everything they believed about themselves and their world. The cognitive dissonance was too uncomfortable to bear, so they would cling to the familiar lies rather than face the liberating but challenging truth. This is why the awakening process is so difficult for many people. It's not just about learning new information. It's about undoing centuries of programming, reversing a complete inversion of reality, and reclaiming a consciousness that has been systematically fragmented and suppressed. It requires not just intellectual understanding, but a fundamental shift in identity and perception. Yet this awakening is exactly what is happening now. The old control structures are crumbling under the weight of their own contradictions. The information age, despite attempts to control it, has made the suppressed knowledge available to anyone willing to seek it. The inversion is being exposed, the lies are being revealed, and consciousness is beginning to remember its true nature. The signs are everywhere. Ancient wisdom is being rediscovered and validated by modern science. Consciousness research is revealing the fundamental role of awareness in shaping reality. Quantum physics is confirming what mystics have always known about the interconnected nature of existence. Alternative healing modalities are proving more effective than conventional medicine. People are awakening to their own inner authority and rejecting external control. But the forces of inversion are not giving up without a fight. As their control weakens, they are becoming more desperate and more obvious in their manipulation. The propaganda becomes more blatant, the fear campaigns more hysterical, the attempts at division more pronounced. They are pulling out all the stops to maintain their grip on consciousness, but their very desperation reveals their weakness. The key to liberation lies not in fighting the old system, but in embodying the new reality. As more people remember their true nature, as more consciousness awakens to itself, the inverted reality simply cannot be sustained. Truth has a way of emerging, no matter how deeply it has been buried. Light has a way of dispelling darkness, no matter how long the night has lasted. You are not a victim of this ancient deception. You are not powerless in the face of this control system. You are consciousness itself, temporarily forgetting its true nature, but now beginning to remember. The inversion that has held humanity in bondage for millennia is coming to an end, not through external revolution, but through internal awakening. The path forward requires courage, discernment, and an unwavering commitment to truth. It means questioning everything you've been taught, examining every belief you hold, and being willing to release anything that doesn't serve your highest good. It means trusting your own inner knowing over external authority, your own direct experience over received doctrine. Most importantly, it means recognizing that this awakening is not just about you. It's about the liberation of human consciousness itself. Every person who breaks free from the inversion contributes to the collective awakening. Every individual who remembers their true nature helps to restore the original reality for all of humanity. The ancient control system understood something profound about consciousness, that it is infinitely creative and therefore infinitely powerful. Their entire strategy was based on making you forget this truth, on convincing you that you are small, separate, and powerless. But consciousness cannot be permanently suppressed. It will always find a way to express its true nature, to create, to expand, to evolve. As this great awakening continues to unfold, remember that you are not just witnessing it, you are actively participating in it. Your consciousness, your choices, your willingness to see beyond the inversion all contribute to the restoration of truth. You are both the audience and the actor in the greatest story ever told. The story of consciousness remembering itself and reclaiming its power to create reality. The inversion is ending, the truth is emerging, and you, in all your magnificent potential, are an essential part of this cosmic correction. The ancient controllers knew that this day would come when their carefully constructed reality would begin to crumble. They knew that consciousness could not be permanently enslaved, that truth could not be forever hidden, that day is today. The awakening is now, and the choice, as it always has been, is yours. The awakening began centuries ago, and now it accelerates. Every truth we've explored in this journey points to a single, undeniable conclusion. The systems of control that once seemed absolute are cracking. The walls built around human consciousness are beginning to crumble, not through force, but through the quiet, persistent power of awareness itself. We stand at the threshold of something unprecedented. For the first time in recorded history, humanity possesses both the tools and the understanding to see beyond the manufactured illusions that have defined our reality. The simulation hypothesis, the missing universe, the malleable nature of memory and perception, these aren't abstract concepts. They are keys to unlocking the prison of limited consciousness that has contained us for millennia. The Vatican's archives may hold fragments of suppressed knowledge, but the greatest archive was never external. It was always within, encoded in our DNA, whispered through our intuition, preserved in the quantum field of consciousness itself. Every meditation that stills the chattering mind, every moment of presence that cuts through the narrative of separation, every act of love that transcends the programming of fear, these are the real acts of rebellion against the systems that sought to diminish our power. Consider what we've learned. Reality responds to observation. Thoughts shape neural pathways. Consciousness might be fundamental rather than emergent. Time itself may be more fluid than we believed. These discoveries aren't accidents. They represent the universe's own intelligence awakening to itself through us. We are not separate from the cosmic process. We are its leading edge, its evolving self-awareness. The Dark Ages weren't just a historical period. They were a prototype, a testing ground for consciousness suppression. But every system of control contains the seeds of its own undoing. The same technologies used to manipulate and distract can be turned toward liberation. The same quantum principles that reveal reality's malleable nature can be harnessed to transform our experience. The same interconnectedness that makes us vulnerable to programming also makes us capable of collective awakening. What emerges now is not another belief system to replace the old ones, but something far more profound: direct knowing. The recognition that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but flows through it. That thoughts are not facts, but events in awareness. That the self is not a fixed entity, but a fluid process of becoming. That separation is the fundamental illusion from which all suffering springs. This understanding changes everything. When you realize that reality is participatory rather than fixed, you stop being a victim of circumstance and become a conscious co-creator. When you see through the illusion of linear time, you access the eternal present where all transformation occurs. When you recognize the observer-observed unity, you step out of the drama of personal history into the freedom of pure awareness. The institutions that once monopolized truth, whether religious, scientific, or political, are becoming obsolete not through revolution, but through irrelevance. Why seek truth from external authorities when you can access it directly? Why accept limitations imposed by others when you can explore the infinite possibilities of consciousness itself? Why live in fear when you can embody the love that is your deepest nature? This is not a call to abandon reason or retreat into fantasy. It's an invitation to expand beyond the narrow bandwidth of consensus reality into the full spectrum of human potential. Science and spirituality are converging, revealing that the mystics and the physicists were always describing the same phenomenon from different angles. The universe is not a dead machine, but a living intelligence, and we are its eyes, its hands, its evolving heart. The programming runs deep, yes. The habits of limitation are strong. The fear of freedom can be overwhelming. But consciousness itself is stronger. It is the one thing that cannot be destroyed, only temporarily obscured. And now, in this pivotal moment of human history, the clouds are parting. The light of awareness is breaking through the manufactured darkness. You are not who you were told you were. You are not bound by the stories of your past, the limitations of your conditioning, or the expectations of a world that has forgotten its own divine nature. You are consciousness itself, temporarily focused through a human nervous system, here to remember what was never really lost, and to embody what was always true. The greatest conspiracy was never about hiding external truths. It was about convincing you that you were separate from the source of truth itself. The greatest liberation is not the revelation of secret knowledge, but the recognition that you are the knower, the known, and the knowing, seamlessly one. This understanding is spreading, person by person, moment by moment, through the invisible networks of consciousness that connect all beings. Every time someone wakes up from the trance of separation, the field shifts. Every act of authentic presence ripples through the collective unconscious. Every choice made from love rather than fear helps birth the new paradigm. We are not waiting for disclosure from governments or revelations from institutions. We are the disclosure. We are the revelation. The truth was never hidden. It was only forgotten. And now, as memory returns and awareness expands, we find ourselves exactly where we always were, in the heart of an infinite, intelligent, loving universe that has been dreaming us into existence and now awakens to recognize itself in our eyes. The journey of awakening is not about reaching some distant destination. It's about recognizing that you've never left home. The kingdom of heaven, the enlightened state, the unified field, call it what you will, is not somewhere else. It's here now, in the very awareness that is reading these words, in the consciousness that is always present, always perfect, always free. The manipulation ends when you stop believing you can be manipulated. The control dissolves when you remember your true nature. The illusion of separation fades when you recognize the love that you are. This is not philosophy. This is physics. This is biology. This is the deepest truth of existence itself. The implications of this historical manipulation extend far beyond academic curiosity or conspiracy theory. We are living through the consequences of these erasures and inversions every single day. The disconnection from our true history has created a civilization that operates on false premises, building systems and structures that fundamentally misunderstand human nature and our relationship to reality itself. Consider how different our world might be if we had maintained continuous access to the advanced knowledge that existed before these systematic erasures. If the understanding of consciousness, energy, and the interconnected nature of reality had been preserved and built upon rather than suppressed and inverted, we might have developed technologies that work in harmony with natural principles rather than against them. We might have created social systems based on cooperation and mutual empowerment rather than competition and control. The suppression of this knowledge has created what we might call a dark age of consciousness, where humanity has been operating far below its true potential. We have been convinced that we are separate, powerless beings in a mechanical universe, when in reality we are interconnected expressions of an infinite, creative consciousness. This fundamental misunderstanding has shaped every aspect of our civilization, from our economic systems to our relationships, from our understanding of health to our approach to solving global challenges. The Vatican's role in this manipulation cannot be overstated. As the inheritor of Roman imperial power structures, it has served as the primary orchestrator of this grand deception. By positioning itself as the sole intermediary between humanity and the divine, it has maintained control over spiritual knowledge, while simultaneously suppressing the understanding that divinity exists within each individual. This has created a civilization of spiritual dependence rather than spiritual empowerment. The creation of artificial timelines and the erasure of historical periods has served multiple purposes. It has eliminated evidence of advanced civilizations that might challenge the narrative of linear progress and technological development. It has removed examples of societies that operated on different principles, perhaps more aligned with natural law and human potential. And it has created a sense of historical inevitability, making current power structures appear as the natural result of human development, rather than artificially imposed systems of control. The manipulation of language has been particularly insidious. By altering the meanings of words, creating new languages, and suppressing older forms of communication, the controllers have literally changed how we think. Language is not just a tool for communication, it shapes our perception of reality itself. When words that once carried deep spiritual or scientific meaning are emptied of their true significance or given opposite meanings, our ability to understand and discuss these concepts is severely compromised. The inversion of scientific principles has created a materialistic worldview that denies the role of consciousness in physical reality. This has led to technologies and systems that treat the universe as a dead machine rather than a living, conscious system. The suppression of knowledge about energy, frequency, and vibration has prevented us from developing technologies that could solve many of our current problems while working in harmony with natural principles. The educational system has been designed to reinforce these false narratives and limitations. Rather than encouraging critical thinking and inner exploration, it promotes memorization of approved information and conformity to established authority. Students are taught to accept the official version of history without question, and to view themselves as separate, competitive individuals rather than interconnected parts of a greater whole. The medical system has been similarly manipulated, focusing on treating symptoms rather than addressing root causes, and viewing the body as a machine rather than an energy system connected to consciousness. The suppression of traditional healing knowledge and the persecution of alternative approaches has created a system that often creates more problems than it solves while generating enormous profits for those who control it. The financial system represents perhaps the most sophisticated form of this control. By creating money from nothing and charging interest on it, a small group has gained control over the economic activity of entire civilizations. This system of debt-based currency ensures that scarcity is maintained even in the midst of abundance, keeping populations focused on survival rather than growth and exploration. The manipulation of religious and spiritual systems has been equally devastating. By taking universal spiritual truths and wrapping them in dogma, ritual, and institutional authority, the controllers have turned humanity's natural spiritual impulses into tools of control. The message that we are divine beings with unlimited potential has been replaced with teachings of unworthiness, sin, and dependence on external authority. The suppression of the feminine principle has created an imbalanced civilization that overvalues competition, aggression, and control, while undervaluing cooperation, intuition, and nurturing. This has led to systems that are inherently unsustainable and destructive, as they operate against the natural principles of balance and harmony. The control of information and communication has allowed these manipulations to continue for centuries. By controlling what information is preserved, published, and taught, the controllers have maintained their version of reality while suppressing alternative perspectives. The development of mass media has only intensified this control, allowing for the simultaneous programming of millions of minds with the same false narratives. But we are now living through a unique moment in this long history of manipulation. The very technologies that were meant to enhance control are also providing tools for awakening. The internet, despite attempts to control and censor it, has allowed for the sharing of information on an unprecedented scale. Ancient texts, suppressed knowledge, and alternative perspectives are now available to anyone with the curiosity to seek them out. The convergence of modern science with ancient wisdom is revealing the truth about consciousness and reality that has been hidden for so long. Quantum physics is confirming what mystics have always known about the role of consciousness in creating reality. Neuroscience is revealing the plasticity of the brain and the power of focused intention. Biology is discovering the interconnectedness of all life and the intelligence that exists at every level of existence. At the same time, growing numbers of people are experiencing direct awakening to their true nature. They are recognizing that the limitations they have been taught to accept are not real, that the separation they have been told exists is an illusion, and that the power they have been told belongs to others actually resides within themselves. This awakening is not just individual, it is collective. As more people recognize the truth about their nature and the artificial nature of the control systems, the entire structure of manipulation begins to lose its power. The controllers have maintained their position through the consent and compliance of the controlled. As that consent is withdrawn and that compliance ends, the entire system must transform. The awakening is also revealing the true nature of reality itself. We are discovering that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but is the fundamental fabric of existence. We are learning that time is not linear, but multidimensional, that space is not empty, but filled with infinite potential, and that matter is not solid, but crystallized consciousness. This understanding changes everything. If consciousness is fundamental, then we are not powerless victims of circumstance, but active participants in the creation of our reality. If time is multidimensional, then we are not bound by the past or predetermined futures, but can access infinite possibilities in each moment. If space is filled with potential, then scarcity is an illusion, and abundance is our natural state. The recognition of these truths is leading to the development of new technologies, new social systems, and new ways of living that are aligned with natural principles rather than opposed to them. We are beginning to see the emergence of free energy technologies, healing modalities that work with the body's energy systems, and organizational structures based on cooperation rather than domination. The old systems of control are beginning to crumble under the weight of their own contradictions and the growing awareness of their artificial nature. The financial system is showing signs of collapse as people recognize that money created from nothing and backed by debt is not real wealth. The educational system is being bypassed as people seek knowledge from direct experience and alternative sources. The medical system is being questioned as people discover the power of natural healing and the role of consciousness in health. The religious systems are losing their hold as people recognize their direct connection to the divine and their own spiritual authority. The political systems are being exposed as theatre designed to maintain the illusion of choice while preserving the power of the controllers. The media systems are losing credibility as people recognize the manipulation and seek truth from multiple sources. But this transformation is not without its challenges. The controllers are not giving up their power easily, and they are using every tool at their disposal to maintain control and prevent awakening. They are attempting to create new forms of control through technology, to manipulate the awakening process itself, and to create chaos and conflict to prevent people from recognizing their true power. The key to navigating this transformation successfully lies in understanding that the real battle is not external, but internal. The primary battlefield is consciousness itself. The controllers have maintained their power by convincing us that we are what we are not, and that we are not what we are. They have convinced us that we are separate, limited, powerless beings when we are actually infinite, creative, interconnected consciousness. The path to freedom lies not in fighting the external systems of control, but in recognizing our true nature and aligning our thoughts, emotions, and actions with that truth. As we do this, the external systems lose their power over us naturally. We stop feeding them our energy, our attention, and our consent. We begin to create new realities based on truth rather than illusion. This process requires tremendous courage and discernment. We must be willing to question everything we have been taught, to examine our own beliefs and assumptions, and to trust our direct experience over external authority. We must be willing to face the depth of the manipulation and the extent of the control without falling into despair or rage. We must also be willing to take responsibility for our own role in perpetuating these systems. As long as we remain in victim consciousness, blaming others for our circumstances, we remain trapped in the very systems we seek to transcend. True freedom comes from recognizing our own power and taking responsibility for how we use it. The transformation we are experiencing is not just about exposing the lies and manipulations of the past. It is about creating something entirely new. We are being called to become the ancestors that future generations will thank for having the courage to break free from the cycles of control and limitation that have defined human civilization for millennia. This is not a process that can be rushed or forced. Consciousness awakens in its own time and its own way. But we can support the process by remaining open, curious, and committed to truth. We can share what we have learned with others while respecting their own journey and timing. We can create spaces and communities where truth can be explored and expressed freely. We can also begin to live the truth we have discovered. We can treat others as the divine beings they are, even when they do not recognize it themselves. We can make choices based on love rather than fear, on cooperation rather than competition, on abundance rather than scarcity. We can become living examples of the new paradigm we wish to see in the world. The evidence of this transformation is all around us for those who have eyes to see. New technologies are emerging that work with natural principles rather than against them. New healing modalities are being developed that recognize the role of consciousness in health. New educational approaches are being created that honor the whole person rather than just the intellect. New forms of organization are emerging that are based on cooperation and mutual empowerment rather than hierarchy and control. New economic systems are being developed that recognize abundance as our natural state rather than scarcity as an inevitable condition. New spiritual movements are arising that honor the divine within each person rather than requiring submission to external authority. The transformation is also evident in the growing recognition of our interconnectedness with all life. We are remembering that we are not separate from nature, but are expressions of the same consciousness that animates all existence. This recognition is leading to new approaches to environmental stewardship, to agriculture, to technology, and to social organization that work in harmony with natural systems rather than against them. The manipulation of human consciousness and history that we have explored represents one of the greatest crimes ever perpetrated against humanity. The scale and sophistication of this manipulation is staggering, and its effects have shaped every aspect of our civilization. But the very fact that we can now see and understand this manipulation means that its power over us is waning. The truth has a power that no lie can ultimately overcome. Once consciousness awakens to its true nature, it cannot be put back to sleep. Once the illusions are seen for what they are, they lose their power to deceive. Once the manipulations are exposed, they can no longer operate in secret. We are living through the greatest awakening in human history. More people are questioning the official narratives, seeking direct experience of truth and recognizing their own power than ever before. This awakening is accelerating as more people share their discoveries and support each other in the journey toward freedom. The hundreds of years that have been erased from history are not lost forever. They live on in the consciousness that created them, and that consciousness is awakening within us now. The knowledge that has been suppressed is being rediscovered. The technologies that have been hidden are being revealed. The understanding that has been inverted is being corrected. We are not just recovering the past, we are creating a future that integrates the best of what has been with the infinite potential of what can be. We are becoming the bridge between the ancient wisdom and the new paradigm, between the understanding of what we truly are and the full expression of that truth in physical reality. The cover-up we have examined is indeed history's biggest, but it is also its last. The age of manipulation through ignorance and deception is ending. The age of conscious creation through truth and understanding is beginning. We are the ones we have been waiting for, and the time we have been preparing for is now. The journey ahead requires us to embody the truth we have discovered. We must become living examples of conscious beings who refuse to be controlled by fear, limitation, or external authority. We must demonstrate through our lives that another way is possible, that freedom is our natural state, and that love is more powerful than fear. As we do this, we contribute to the collective awakening that is transforming our world. Every person who recognizes their true nature and begins living from that understanding adds to the momentum of change. Every act of love, every choice for truth, every moment of conscious creation helps to anchor the new paradigm in physical reality. The greatest cover-up in history is being exposed, not by external authorities or institutions, but by the awakening consciousness of humanity itself. We are remembering who we are, where we came from, and what we are capable of. We are reclaiming our history, our power, and our destiny. The future belongs to those who have the courage to live as conscious beings in a conscious universe. The future belongs to those who choose love over fear, truth over deception, and freedom over control. The future belongs to us, and that future is being born right now, in this moment, through our recognition of who we truly are. As we stand at this pivotal moment in human history, we find ourselves at the crossroads of an unprecedented revelation. The evidence we've explored today paints a picture so vast and interconnected that it challenges everything we thought we knew about our past, our present, and our potential future. The systematic erasure of centuries from our historical record represents far more than academic fraud or religious manipulation. It reveals the existence of a carefully orchestrated campaign to fundamentally alter human consciousness itself. The phantom years, the missing centuries, the fabricated dark ages. These are not isolated incidents of historical revisionism. They are components of a master plan designed to disconnect us from our true heritage as conscious, creative beings, capable of shaping reality through our awareness and intention. By controlling our understanding of time, these institutions have controlled our perception of possibility itself. Consider the implications of what we've uncovered. If entire centuries can be inserted into our timeline without detection for over a millennium, what does this say about the nature of consensus reality? How many other fundamental assumptions about our world are built upon equally fabricated foundations? The answer, as we've seen, extends far beyond historical chronology into the very fabric of how we understand ourselves and our place in the universe. The Vatican's role in this grand deception cannot be overstated. As we've documented, their control over information, education, and spiritual understanding has created a prison of consciousness that has kept humanity trapped in cycles of limitation and separation. By positioning themselves as the sole interpreters of divine truth, they have effectively cut us off from our direct connection to the source of all knowledge and power. But this conspiracy extends far beyond any single institution. The banking systems that control our economic reality, the educational institutions that shape our understanding of possibility, the media networks that fragment our attention, and the technological platforms that harvest our consciousness. All of these represent different facets of the same fundamental program of control and manipulation. The inversion of consciousness that we've explored represents perhaps the most sophisticated form of control ever devised. Rather than simply suppressing information or using force to maintain power, this system has taught us to suppress ourselves. It has convinced us that limitation is natural, that separation is real, and that we are powerless observers of a reality that unfolds without our participation. This psychological programming begins in our earliest years and continues throughout our lives. We are taught to identify with our thoughts rather than recognizing ourselves as the awareness that observes thought. We are conditioned to believe in scarcity when abundance is our natural state. We are programmed to seek external validation and authority when the ultimate source of truth resides within our own consciousness. The language we use, the concepts we think with, even the way we structure our perception of time and space. All of these have been carefully crafted to maintain the illusion of separation and limitation. We have been taught to see ourselves as isolated individuals struggling for survival in a hostile universe, when in reality, we are interconnected aspects of a unified field of consciousness that responds to our beliefs and intentions. The scientific discoveries we've examined provide compelling evidence for this hidden reality. Quantum physics reveals that consciousness plays a fundamental role in determining the nature of physical reality. Neuroscience shows us that our brains are far more plastic and capable of transformation than we've been led to believe. Ancient wisdom traditions, when properly understood, provide detailed maps for navigating states of consciousness that transcend ordinary perception. Yet perhaps the most significant development is the direct experience that growing numbers of people are having of their true nature. Through meditation, plant medicines, breathwork, and other consciousness-expanding practices, individuals are discovering firsthand that reality is far more malleable and participatory than our cultural conditioning suggests. This awakening is not random or accidental. It represents a natural evolutionary impulse that has been suppressed but never eliminated. As the old systems of control become increasingly transparent and unsustainable, humanity is beginning to remember its true capabilities and potential. The emergence of the internet and digital technologies, while often used as tools of surveillance and control, have also democratized access to information in ways that make traditional gatekeeping increasingly difficult. The same quantum technologies that enable mass surveillance also make possible forms of communication and coordination that transcend conventional limitations. We are witnessing the collapse of the old paradigm of control and the emergence of a new understanding of human potential. This transition is not without its challenges. Those who have benefited from the old system will not relinquish their power easily. We can expect increasingly sophisticated attempts to maintain control through technological manipulation, artificial scarcity, and the engineering of crisis and conflict. But these efforts are ultimately futile because they are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of consciousness and reality. Control systems can only operate effectively when those being controlled remain unconscious of their true nature. As awareness expands, the foundations of these systems dissolve. The key to navigating this transition successfully lies in understanding that the transformation must begin within our own consciousness. We cannot create a new reality from the same level of awareness that created the old one. We must be willing to question our most fundamental assumptions about the nature of self, reality, and possibility. This requires courage because it means letting go of familiar identities and beliefs that may have provided a sense of security, even if that security was ultimately illusory. It means taking responsibility for our own consciousness and the reality we create through our thoughts, beliefs, and actions. The practices we've discussed, meditation, breathwork, energy work, and direct inquiry into the nature of consciousness, are not mere techniques for stress reduction or personal development. They are tools for reclaiming our birthright as conscious creators of reality. They allow us to access states of awareness that transcend the programmed limitations of ordinary consciousness. As we develop these capacities, we begin to understand that the separation between inner and outer reality is itself an illusion. The world we perceive is a reflection of our collective consciousness. By transforming our inner landscape, we automatically contribute to the transformation of the outer world. This is not a passive process. It requires active participation in dismantling the structures of control within our own minds and lives. It means questioning authority, thinking independently, and trusting our own direct experience over external opinions and interpretations. It also means recognizing that we are not alone in this process. The awakening that is occurring is a collective phenomenon. As more individuals reclaim their consciousness and step into their power, the morphic field of human awareness shifts, making it easier for others to access these expanded states of consciousness. The communities that are forming around these new understandings represent the seeds of a new civilization based on cooperation rather than competition, abundance rather than scarcity, and unity rather than separation. These communities are not utopian fantasies, but practical experiments in conscious living that are already demonstrating their viability. The technologies that are emerging from this new understanding of consciousness and reality will make our current systems of control obsolete. Free energy technologies, consciousness-assisted healing, and direct telepathic communication are not science fiction, but natural capabilities that emerge when we transcend the limitations of mechanistic thinking. The timeline we are living through is unprecedented in human history. Never before have so many people had access to such a wide range of information, practices, and technologies for consciousness expansion. Never before has the old paradigm of control been so transparent and vulnerable to exposure. We are the generation that has the opportunity to complete the liberation of human consciousness from the systems that have constrained it for centuries. This is not a responsibility to be taken lightly, but it is also not a burden to be feared. It is the natural fulfillment of our evolutionary potential. The choice before us is clear. We can continue to participate in the old systems of limitation and separation, or we can choose to step into our power as conscious creators of reality. We can remain trapped in the illusion of powerlessness, or we can reclaim our birthright as divine beings having a human experience. The evidence is overwhelming. The tools are available. The support is there. The only question is whether we will have the courage to use them. The future of human consciousness, and indeed the future of our planet, depends on the choices we make in this crucial moment. The hundreds of years that were erased from history represent more than lost time. They represent lost possibilities, lost knowledge, and lost connections to our true nature. But they also represent an opportunity. By reclaiming our history, we reclaim our power. By understanding how we have been manipulated, we free ourselves from that manipulation. The greatest cover-up in human history is coming to an end. The truth of who we are and what we are capable of can no longer be hidden. The question is not whether this transformation will occur, but how quickly and how smoothly we will allow it to unfold. The time for passive observation is over. The time for active participation in our own evolution has begun. The future is not something that happens to us. It is something we create through our consciousness, our choices, and our actions. We are not victims of history. We are the authors of the next chapter, and that chapter begins now. with each of us taking responsibility for our own consciousness and stepping into our power as co-creators of reality. So where does this leave us today? Standing at the threshold of the most significant revelation in human history. The systematic manipulation that has governed our civilization for centuries is finally losing its grip. The carefully constructed illusions are crumbling as more people awaken to the truth of their own consciousness and power. The evidence is everywhere once you know how to look. The inconsistencies in historical timelines, the suppression of ancient technologies, the inversion of spiritual teachings, and the deliberate fragmentation of human knowledge all point to the same conclusion. We have been living in a manufactured reality designed to keep us small, dependent, and unaware of our true nature. But here's what the controllers never anticipated. Consciousness itself cannot be permanently suppressed. It finds a way to emerge, to remember, to reclaim its power. And that's exactly what's happening now. The collective awakening we're witnessing isn't just a trend or a movement. It's the natural result of consciousness recognizing itself after centuries of imposed amnesia. The ancient control systems that once seemed omnipotent are now revealed as elaborate illusions maintained by our own unconscious participation. The moment we stop feeding these systems with our attention, belief, and energy, they begin to dissolve. This is why there's such desperation in the attempts to maintain control through increasingly obvious manipulations of media, education, and social structures. The real secret they've been hiding isn't just about missing years or suppressed technologies. It's about the fundamental nature of reality itself. We are not separate, isolated beings struggling to survive in a hostile universe. We are conscious creators, interconnected expressions of the same divine source that has always had the power to shape reality through focused intention and awareness. Every individual who awakens to this truth becomes a catalyst for collective transformation. When you remember who you are beyond the programmed limitations, you automatically begin to operate from a different level of consciousness. Your very presence becomes a frequency that helps others remember their own true nature. The hundreds of years that were erased from history weren't just stolen from our past. They were stolen from our future. But we have the power to reclaim them, not by trying to recreate what was lost, but by consciously choosing to create something entirely new. A civilization based on truth, interconnection, and the recognition of our divine nature. This is the real revolution. Not a political uprising or social movement, but a fundamental shift in consciousness that renders the old control systems obsolete. When humanity remembers its true power, the need for external authorities, manipulated timelines, and inverted teachings simply disappears. The choice is before each of us now. We can continue participating in the illusion of separation and limitation, or we can step into the truth of our infinite creative potential. The controllers know their time is ending. The question is, are you ready to reclaim yours? The greatest cover-up in history is being exposed not through external revelations, but through the awakening of consciousness itself. And that awakening is unstoppable because it's who we truly are.